The Seekers. This is their story about four people who have been together for more than 50 years. And it's a story that we'll tell from the very beginning. My name is David Wladaver.
And I'm Patricia King.
And we want to welcome you to the Heritage Museum here in Tarpon Springs. We want to particularly thank Dr. Kathleen Monahan, who is the Director of the Cultural and Civic Services Department of the City of Tarpon Springs, for giving us the opportunity to bring this presentation to you at this beautiful place. Now, this program is being dedicated to Ron Edgeworth, the late husband of Judith Durham, who died in 1994 of motor neuron disease, MND, also called ALS. And Patricia and I are donating the compensation that we are receiving for this show to MND ALS charities in Australia, which are focused on the care of people living with this terrible illness and enabling research that will identify the cause and lead to better care, control, and ultimately a cure. Well, who are these four people who have been coming on stage for more than 50 years? So let me introduce the Seekers. Well, why don't we let them introduce themselves?
The Seekers are Australia's own music royalty.
Hi, I'm Bruce Woodley.
And I'm Judith Durham.
I'm Keith Potker. And I'm Athol Guy. Together, we're the Seekers.
Well, let's learn a little bit more about each of them. Judith Durham is the lead singer for the Seekers. She's a soprano composer. She is classically trained in piano and voice. And something just interesting we came across, Judith and George M. Cohan, the famous American entertainer, share the same birth date. Not the same birth year, but the same birth date. And of course you all know the songs that George M. wrote, You're a Grand Old Flag, Give My Regards to Broadway. And do you remember that line in Yankee Doodle, which goes, a real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. Well, George M. Cohan and Judith Durham do share the same birth date, July 3rd. Fact. Athol Guy plays the double bass, and he's easily recognizable by his horn-rimmed glasses. And during live performances, he is usually like the master of ceremonies. He'll be introducing songs and telling stories and the like. He also is a producer of fine wines in Australia. He produces an award-winning Shiraz called Athol's Paddock. And he's also the only one of the Seekers who has held a political position. He was elected to the Victorian Legislative Assembly, where he served for 7 years. Bruce Woodley, well, in 2 words, prolific composer. He has written many of the songs that the Seekers have sung, and he has co-written music with other well-known entertainers, such as Tom Paxton and Paul Simon. Bruce plays guitar, banjo, mandolin, and drums. Bruce co-wrote a song, I Am Australian, which, in my opinion, has spectacular lyrics. It tells the story of Australia from the time when the Aboriginal people first walked on the land, and it takes you through up to the present, telling the stories of all of the immigrants and all of the people who were either famous or in some cases infamous for their escapades in the development of the country. The chorus of this song is poetry at its most beautiful. It goes like this. We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian. Keith Potger is another prolific composer, and he has also been the person who has arranged many of the songs that the Seekers have sung and written many of the songs that the Seekers have sung. He is the tenor of the group, and Keith plays the 12-string guitar most of the time, 6-string guitar, banjo, recorder, and keyboard. Keith is the only Seeker that was not born in Australia. He was born in what was then called Ceylon, which is now called Sri Lanka, which is a country, an island country south of India. And just some interesting history in the early days of the Seekers. Keith was a radio producer for the Australian Broadcasting Company, called commonly the ABC, which I guess the closest comparison would be in the United States, public broadcasting. And the ABC had a rule, and that was that if you worked for the ABC, you could not have a second job. Well, this was a problem. Keith would always jokingly say, well, first of all, because I worked at the ABC, I had to have a second job. But when the Seekers did their first gigs, and if there was ever a program listing the Seekers, he would never use his own name. And the first album that the Seekers produced, called Introducing the Seekers, they superimposed, or what we would call today, photoshopped, the face of someone else in place of Keith's. I don't think he has to do that anymore, but at that time it was necessary. So now we know something about these people, and from this point on, let's talk about them on a first name basis, okay? Judith, Athol, Bruce, and Keith. Now, before Judith joined the Seekers, she was an up-and-coming jazz singer in Melbourne, and also trained in classical piano. Why don't we have a listen to her? also had a sense of humor, wouldn't you say? Not bad.
Quite good.
Now, how did it all start? Well, it started with, as Judith always calls Ethel, Bruce, and Keith the boys, to this very day. They formed a group called the Escorts. And then they added a fourth singer, Ken Ray, and they changed their name to the Seekers. Well, Ken left to get married, and eventually they looked for someone to take his place, and they eventually added Judith. And let's see how this went down.
Oh, good morning. Didn't you around here?
Yes, I'm Judith Durham. Are you Ethel Guy?
Yes. Judith Durham. I wasn't supposed to come and hear you sing sometime.
Yes, you were.
And she did. So now that we have Judith as part of the group and we have the four Seekers that have been together for 50 years, let's have them introduced.
Now, Judith was the one who brought the spirituals to the Seekers. And how did this happen? She was born in 1943. One similarity we have is that she's 5'2", and I stretch to be that tall. She was inspired by her dad, who was a self-taught pianist, and she began taking music lessons at the age of 6. And she talked about how she would tackle a piece of music. She would get a piece of sheet music, and it would be a mystery to her. So when she started to play it, it would reveal itself, just like when we read a book. We start at the beginning, and we don't know what the end is going to be like. And that's how she tackled every piece of sheet music. She felt it was an adventure. Now, before, of course, in the 40s, there was no TV. So they used to listen to radio all the time. And she particularly liked jazz from America, Dixieland, gospel, blues, and she listened to Bessie Smith quite a bit. So her goal was to be a jazz singer, and she did sing with a jazz band from 17. She started at 17 with a jazz band. And so when she went to with the Seekers, that's when they added spirituals. Before, they just did mainly folk. So now also, another thing about Judith is she had a serious case of the measles when she was a child, which affected her lung capacity. But she had to make adjustments, and she did, because her voice was important. So she became a vegetarian in 1968, and in one of the interviews I heard, she said that she eats, before she performs, she eats, like, if she has to eat, she eats grapes, greens, grape juice, and she doesn't drink alcohol, and she gets plenty of sleep. So she said her condition just led her to a life of self-discipline. She never complained about it. She just felt that this was just something she had to deal with, and that was fine. And so these are two of my favorite songs that she sings, When the Stars Begin to Fall and Just a Closer Walk with Thee. My Lord, what a morning. My Lord, what a morning. My He will weep for the rocks and mountains. He will weep for the rocks and mountains. He will weep for the rocks and mountains. When the stars begin to fall. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee.
Now, when the Seekers were initially performing in Melbourne, they had a gig every Monday in a cafe called the Treble Clef, which is no longer there. And before Judith joined them, they would get a modest turnout each Monday. But once Judith became part of the Seekers and the word got out, it was standing room only every Monday night at the Treble Clef. If we just look in general at their success at that time, you know, it was moderate success. They didn't strike it big. And one other thing that they did quite often was that they sang on cruise ships. And often these would be cruises to Tonga, sort of similar here in Florida if we went on a cruise from, say, Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas. But they got their big break when they agreed to sing on the Sitmar cruise liner, the SS Fairsky, which was headed for London, England, with a planned 10-week return to Australia. And here's a clip of them practicing on board the ship.
Well, why don't we do walk, don't run?
Good. Well, let's...
Like that one?
Yeah, let's try it. Okay? 3. Sorry, I started wrong anyway. Let me count it in. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Seekers worked their passage as entertainers on HMS Fairsky. They intended to stay in London only for 10 weeks.
Well, 10 weeks became 5 years. And to say that they achieved success beyond their wildest dreams probably gets the award for tonight as the understatement of the evening.
The Seekers, I think, trumped them all. I mean, they knocked the Beatles, the Rolling Stones off the charts.
You know, you have to imagine this. They got off the ship in well, you don't get off the ship in London, probably in Brighton, but they had arranged, to do some singing and the like. But what happened, and happened almost instantly, was, well, first of all, they became the first group ever to have their first song reach #1 in the UK. That's something that did not happen to the Beatles. It did not happen to the Rolling Stones. They were also the first group whose first 3 singles reached #1 in the UK. And that's something that Michael Jackson never accomplished, that Madonna never accomplished. And listen to this. They got off, the ship sounds like, immigrants, but within 6 weeks they were on stage at the London Palladium. I mean, what happened was so much, so fast. Probably nothing like this has ever happened so much in such a short period of time that I'm aware of. It was just incredible. Now, yes, they did have many hits in the UK. We'll be singing some of these 3 songs, I'll Never Find Another You, A World of Our Own, and Morningtown Ride. And you'll notice that the composer of 2 of them is the same. It's a person named Tom Springfield. Tom not only wrote these 2 songs for the Seekers, but he also wrote Georgie Girl, and he wrote The Carnival Is Over. He was very instrumental in the early success of the Seekers. And if you are ever at a Seekers concert and they talk about Tom, they usually refer to him very kindly as the 5th Seeker. Tom had his 80th birthday last year. He lives in England and still doing very well. So let's have a listen to these 3 numbers. There's a new world somewhere they call the Promised Land, and I'll be there someday if you will hold my hand. I still need you there beside me, no matter what I do, for I know I'll never find another you. It's a long journey, so stay by my side. When I walk through the storm, you'll be my guide, be my guide. If they gave me a fortune, my treasure would be small. I could lose it all tomorrow and never mind at all. But if I should lose your love, dear, I don't know what I'd do, for I know I'll never find another you, another you, another you. A world of our own. Close the door, light the light. We're staying home tonight, far away from the bustle and the bright city light. Let them all fade away. Just leave us alone, and we'll live in a world of our own. We'll build a world of our own that no one else can share. All our sorrows we leave far behind us there, and I know you will find there'll be peace of mind when we live in a world of our own. And I know you will find there'll be peace of mind when we live in a world next song, Morningtown Ride, is it's a children's lullaby. And it's something that could be sung to children as they're going to sleep, and it's basically reassuring them that everything is going to be okay. And of course, they're basically on their way to Morningtown, if you will, the next morning. But since this is a ride, it's a train ride, so let me put on my conductor's hat.
All aboard.
Train whistle blowing makes a sleepy noise. Underneath their blankets go all the girls and boys. Rockin', rollin', riding out along the bay, all bound for Morningtown, many miles away.
Driver at the engine, fireman rings the bell, Sandman swings the lantern to show that all is well. Rockin', rollin', riding out along the bay, all bound for Morningtown, many miles away. Somewhere there is sunshine, somewhere there is day, somewhere there is Morningtown, many miles away. Okay, here's Judith. Success after success, and she's still making her own clothes, which is why I wore something like this. I could have made it, but I didn't. In the old days, I could have made it. Now I could not. But anyway, so it wasn't until after the Seekers had 3 major hits that she stopped making her own clothes because she became too busy. So, although millions of people fell in love with Judith, she was filled with self-doubt and anxiety and felt unglamorous. So she needed relief from the spotlight, and she wondered, how am I going to stay with the Seekers and ever have a solo jazz career? How am I ever going to find time to find love and get married? I'm already 24. So she couldn't figure out what to do. So how could she accomplish these goals?
All through the 50-plus years that the Seekers have been singing, many of the songs were written by the Seekers for their shows, both in the 1960s and in more contemporary times. These are 2 songs. One is called All I Can Remember, that Keith wrote, and Red Rubber Ball, which Bruce co-wrote with Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel. Some of you may remember that song, Red Rubber Ball. It went up to number 2 on the charts in America, not sung by the Seekers, but by a group called Circle, Cyrkle. Summer days and summer breezes, flowers everywhere, are all that I remember of times we used to share. Summer nights and summer beaches flowing into fall. That's all I can remember, all I can recall. So my love, the more I think, the more I want to say. Your love was more like sunshine and laughing summer days. Once again I realize I loved you most of all. That That's all I can remember, all I can recall, all I can remember, all I can recall. Red Rubber Ball.
I should have known you'd bid me farewell. There's a lesson to be learned from this, and I learned it very well. Now I know you're not the only starfish in the sea. If I never hear your name again, it's all the same to me.
And I think it's gonna be alright. Yes, the worst is over now. The morning sun is shining like a red rubber ball. When the Seekers started their performing in England, they made an agreement amongst the four of them, and that was that if any of them were to quit the group, he or she had to give the others 6 months advance notice. And based on some of the things that Patricia had mentioned of Judith's desire to do other things and some personal insecurities, which Judith herself has admitted, she gave notice to the group that she was going to leave in 6 months, which would mean that the group was to break up. Well, after this, they continued to perform, and for a time they kept this secret to themselves. And during this time, going forward, they made one return trip to Australia. And here is an interview of the Seekers. Mostly Keith seems to be doing most of the talking. Basically someone asking them, you know, you guys just came from the UK with 5 incredible years. How did you do it? I think his answer is pretty funny.
And how does it feel, you know, being back in Australia after the cold, freezing weather in England?
Well, actually, we'd like to say it was cold and freezing, but we had some terrific weather in England. We arrived to a great summer, and the winter wasn't all that bad. We had a white Christmas and everything like that, so it was quite good.
And the big question with everybody is, of course, how did a practically unknown Australian group become such a very big thing in England and even in America at the moment?
Hey, that was all done with mirrors, I tell you.
All done with mirrors. There was another very famous event in the career of the Seekers when they were in Australia. They gave a concert in Melbourne at the Myer Music Bowl, which attracted over 200,000 fans, which at that time was equivalent to about 10% of the population of the city of Melbourne. And at that time, it set a Guinness Book of Records for the largest audience to come to any show in the Southern Hemisphere. And that record still holds today. Here they are at the Myer Music Bowl. I think you're all familiar with that song. Now, when the Seekers returned to the UK, the BBC approached them and offered them a show, their own show, a one-off show. Well, they had a dilemma because they knew they were going to split up, and they talked about it amongst them. You know, if they were to tell the BBC they were splitting up, they might cancel the show. On the other hand, if they didn't tell them, well, that wouldn't be honest. Well, they chose to tell them and let the chips fall where they may. Well, what happened was the BBC went ahead with the show, nevertheless, but all they did, as you'll see, they changed the name of the show. Fascinating to look at the seats that the Bears are wearing. You can see the Beatles, and this is the typical classic 1960s. And then at the end of the show, Athol confirms, not just to the audience watching in the UK, but very quickly to the whole world.
Thank you very, very much. And goodbye, because I'm afraid tonight the carnival really is over.
They really, just about every concert they gave, they end the concert with the carnival is over.
Their short but brilliant career had lasted just 5 years, and suddenly it was over. While the boys had enjoyed their newfound celebrity, fame had sat uncomfortably with Judith Durham. Weighed down by complexes and insecurities, she quit and the group disbanded.
The big shock to me was the week of our breakup and the news broke internationally in London, and Tony Charlton was in London and came to interview us backstage, and he said, "You can't do this. Australia is crying. There is national grieving for what you're about to do. You can't leave the group."
Fascinating. Well, they did split up. They each went their own ways. So let's see what each of them did.
But life went on. Each of them carved out new careers. With her one-woman show, Judith toured the world for 25 years, even returning to the piano, the career that might have been had the Seekers not swept it away. Bruce Woodley, the songwriter of the group, stuck to his trade, writing songs, among them that other anthem, I Am Australia.
One thing I would add about Bruce, when he was interviewed and asked about these days, what he said was, yes, sure, he wrote a lot of music, but what he called his core business was writing jingles, small commercial spots for radio and television. That was his big business. So let's see how Keith is doing. What does he do now? Other than sit on an airplane.
For Keith Potker, life after the Seekers was the same but different. He went behind the scenes to form and manage a British group called the New Seekers.
And Athol?
Meanwhile, Athol Guy didn't really seem to know what to do after the Seekers, so he did everything. He became a Liberal politician and, for a while, a game show host.
Of course, the Seekers were always in demand for commercial spots. Here we'll see a clip of one for an automobile made by a company called Holden, which in the 1950s was the biggest seller of automobiles in Australia. I think it's got about 2 more years and it's going to be entirely phased out. This is a spot for a Holden car called a Tirana.
Break away!
Tirana GTR. Quick, responsive, safe and sure. A beautiful mover.
See the new Tirana range at your Holden dealers tomorrow.
Anybody want to buy a Tirana? The major event in Judith's life going forward was when she invited Ron Edgeworth to come to Australia to be her musical director and manager.
You team up with English musician Ron Edgeworth. He not only becomes your musical director, but then your husband. Over the next 5 years, you carve out a career as a solo singer and inspire a whole new wave of fans. Judith, everything's going pretty well until you hit your early 30s. And they are tragic and disastrous years for you. You lose both your parents, then your entire life savings when your Swiss bank collapses overnight. You're left with virtually nothing and you still have to pay the bills. So you and husband Ron now focus on a jazz career. The highlight is the legendary Newport Jazz Festival in 1978 when 3,000 people give you a standing ovation. And you finally escape the shadow of the Seekers. Then in May 1990, tragedy strikes again.
Former Seekers lead singer Judith Durham is in a serious but stable condition in Melbourne's Alfred Hospital after a head-on car crash on the Calder Highway northwest of Melbourne.
The driver of the other car is killed instantly. You sustain multiple fractures to your right arm and left leg. It's now 1992. You and Ron are just getting your lives back together and your world collapses again. Ron is diagnosed with motor neurone disease. You're told it will paralyse and eventually kill him.
Terrible, terrible news. Now, the Seekers were individually on their own, and after 20 years of each doing his and her own thing, they decided to get together for dinner one night in 1992. Really, they were just wanted to catch up on each other and see how they were all doing, but it kind of led to a little more eventually.
It's been 25 years since they've shared a stage, but now they're reforming. Graham Archer has this exclusive preview.
Okay, this next song is our last
This
song
is the
together.
flashback to the UK.
I guess at a time like this, there are a lot of things that you could probably say, but I think that really there are only two things. And that is, from all of us, very, very sincerely, thank you. Thank you very, very much. And goodbye, because I'm afraid tonight the carnival really is over.
But in the world of entertainment, nothing is permanent, least of all retirement. And while there have been several combinations travelling under the name of the Seekers, the original quartet have not been in the same room together for 25 years. That is, until now. Fans, clutch your pacemakers, the Seekers are back. History is about to be repeated and remade. Right now, the band is flat out cranking up the old magic to celebrate their 25th anniversary with a one-off national and world tour.
So in 1993, they kicked off their Silver Jubilee tour.
Tonight, as part of their 25-year Silver Jubilee reunion celebration, they are back together again. Athol Guy, Bruce Woodley, Keith Potker, and Judith Durham, the Seekers.
They not only had their Silver Jubilee tour, but they sang together for another 11 years. They did tour Australia, New Zealand, and then they went on back to the UK, where, you know, the great success, where they first achieved their great success.
Now, history is in the making with our music today. Do you remember this group? Yes, it's the Seekers. It's the Seekers who had a string of hits, including Georgie Girl, The Carnival Is Over, and A World of Our Own in the 60s. Well, it's 25 years since they broke up, but now they're back together and performing exclusively for the first time on British television. Please welcome Judith Durham and the Seekers.
And they did complete this worldwide tour. And as I mentioned earlier, the Seekers still continue to write many of their own songs. And these are some of the more contemporary songs. You're My Spirit, co-written by Bruce and Athol. Time and Again, which we think is just a lovely ballad, a lovely waltz. And Future Road, which Keith co-wrote with two other people.
You're my spirit, you're my guiding light, you're my comfort through the darkest night. When I'm troubled, there's one thing I'm certain of, you're my spirit, you're the one I love. When I don't need a witness, and I don't need persuasion, just send me the power of your salvation. Oh, you're my spirit. Oh, love, what has become of me? I'm sure missing your company. Your day's beginning, my day's about to end. You are so much a part of me. You are the soul and the heart of me. I find myself thinking of you time and again. Oh, love, when you are far away, I can't disguise the way that I'm feeling when I see those faraway eyes. Time and again.
Future Road.
If I had the power of the people and I ruled the world, after all that I've seen and the places I've been,
Nothing would be better than to make a change here or there. It is easy to say, but there may be a way.
stand all the people in one line, paint them all green in the sunshine, take some chances, come on, let's find the answers. We may stumble, never crumble, it's tomorrow, everyone hold together, share a load, if we put our dreams down, future road, we can ride our dreams down, future road.
And of course, Australia's other anthem, I Am Australian. I came from the dream time, from the dusty red soil plains. I am the ancient heart, the keeper of the flame. I stood upon the rocky shores, I watched the tall ships come. For 40,000 years I've been the first Australian. I came upon the prison ship, bowed down by iron chains. I fought the land, endured the lash, and waited for the rains.
I'm a settler, I'm a farmer's wife, on dry and barren road.
A convict and a free man, I became Australian.
I'm the daughter of a digger who saw the mother load. The girl became a woman on the long and dusty road. I'm a child of the Depression. I saw the good times come. I'm a bushy, I'm a babbler, I am Australian. We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice.
the Silver Anniversary tour is over, and in December 1994, Ron Edgeworth dies. Australia, Land of Today. That's another song that Judith wrote, by the way. Well, they're each out performing on their own, and here's a clip from London, Judith singing in 2003. We have to start thinking about the time frames here. You know, they started singing in the mid-1960s, and now it's 2003. And let me tell you, Judith's voice is as beautiful as it always was.
You're always window shopping, but never stopping to buy. So shed those dowdy feathers and fly.
How it will be.
Just a teaser.
And then, of course, we have to sing that beautiful song that Judith co-wrote with David Riley, Colors of My Life.
This is one of the 19 songs that Judith wrote. She was quite prolific, really.
I can't seem to get my sleep now any old night. Mr. Sandman passes by my door. Life has changed since you've been there to say it's all right. You taught me to understand what I thought couldn't be. Don't mind missing sleep if I can see colors of my life. You got love to fill my heart. I don't need a rainbow with colors of my life. Colors blend to show that I am happy with you. I can never be the same again. How my eyes are looking past the life that I knew. I'll be shedding black and gray to take on red and
They got together for a 25th. They sang together for another 11 years. And then after 10 years of being apart, they got together and they said, you know, this is 50 years. Do we still have the magic? Do we still have the sound? Do we still have that incredibly beautiful four-part harmony? Well, they went into a studio and they tried it out, and it all sounded good. So they decided, okay, we're going to have a 50th, a golden anniversary tour. So they reformed.
The Seekers' 50th birthday celebrations, in combination with the launch of their 2013 national tour, provide some hilarious moments for everyone as they celebrate with their fans at Melbourne's Hamer Hall.
I wouldn't have missed this. They have been friends of mine for more than 50 years. I knew them before they were the Seekers, individually. Well, I think it's a wonderful thing for a younger generation who will discover them for the very first time. And I'm sure they'll drag their parents and their grandparents along too.
But in May 2013,
she's been part of our national fabric for 50 years, and tonight the entire country is behind singer Judith Durham, who's been rushed to hospital with a brain hemorrhage. She complained of a headache last night after a Seekers concert in Melbourne, and by this morning had been diagnosed with a potentially lethal problem.
well, let's catch up and see how she's doing.
Judith Durham had a brain hemorrhage on the 14th of May. 6 weeks later, and on her 70th birthday, Judith Durham has spoken publicly for the first time.
Well, the big thing is reading and writing, mainly writing, interestingly enough. That's been a huge learning curve. I literally was starting again to write. And I didn't realise, I didn't appreciate the gift that we have.
And how about singing? Have you been able to have a little sing yet?
Yes. Look, I'm very, very fortunate that the doctors put me to the test very early in the piece. I think everybody around me was sort of skirting that question of, can she sing still, you see? And nobody sort of wanted to be the first to take that plunge. So I was very, very fortunate that they decided just right there and then, well, let's sing the tune, you know. So luckily that was all intact, and I still sing in tune, and I'm expecting to be back on stage to sing again, you know, as soon as all the therapy's done, really.
Back on the stage after her rehabilitation. I'll add a few other things that Judith was going through during this time. The first morning she awoke in the hospital, you've already learned that she has a rather unique diet. So she asked for a piece of paper and a pencil to write down a list of the food that she wanted brought to the hospital. So they gave her the paper, she put the pencil in her hand. She couldn't write. She lost the ability to write. She had to totally relearn that. She lost short-term memory, which she jokingly said, well, that shouldn't affect me when I'm out there singing, because all of the songs I sing, they were a long time ago, so they're not in my short-term memory. They're back there, and I've still got them. But the issue relating to her singing is more than just passing interest as to whether, you know, a singer could still sing. Of course, there was that interest, but what I learned is that a good percentage of the people who have a brain hemorrhage in that particular part of the brain actually lose their ability to carry a tune. So the interest by the doctors was not just, you know, will you be able to get out there and sing and play your tambourine, but, you know, it was quite a serious concern. She went through all the rehabilitation, and they picked up where they left off. There was just a delay. For example, in the UK, where they had concerts planned all across the UK, you know, there were ticket holders at all of these different venues, you know, in Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales, and the concerts were all canceled. So they were rescheduled months later, with the tickets still being good on these new days. They added, I think, one other concert, and then more people were able to purchase tickets to see them. Now, on their tour of the UK, their final 2 concerts were in London at Royal Albert Hall on the 2nd and the 3rd of June of last year. And here is a clip of the Seekers singing that night. If you noticed in the backdrop there was some older black and whites. They did this during their tour in the UK, and they actually had a subsequent tour in New Zealand. And they would often sing a song, and what flashed on the screen behind them was the Seekers singing the same song 50 years ago. Sometimes, you know, I almost synchronized identically. It was really, really well done, I have to say that. And of course, just like every other concert, they ended with The Carnival Is Over. Now, we have to put this in perspective because they've been singing for 50 years. They've gone on this world concert. They're wrapping it up at Royal Albert Hall the last night. So you have to wonder, you know, is the carnival over now? You know, if you get my point. And here we are. I doubt that there was a dry eye in the theater that night. Now, after the show, fans gathered at the stage door in the back of Royal Albert Hall, hoping to catch a glimpse of Judith as she left. Do you think they saw her? I wouldn't show it if they didn't. It was really terrific, though. You know, I think, you know, there are some people here in the audience tonight who know the Seekers, you know, fairly well. Some people tonight came from Pennsylvania, Minnesota via center of the state from in Florida. They're not just entertainers. Let me tell you, they're terrific people. They're so nice. They're so real. It's just fantastic, I have to say that. So what's next now for the Seekers? You know, they've had their gold records, their platinum, multi-platinum records. They've been named Australians of the Year. They've been elected to the Australian Recording Industry Hall of Fame. Last year in 2014 at the Queen's Birthday Honors, which are a major event each year, they were each awarded the Office of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to the performing arts as an entertainer through their contributions to Australian music and as a supporter for not-for-profit organizations. And not only that, ladies and gentlemen, they got on a postage stamp. So, we all have to ask the question, is the carnival over?
Today, the Seekers are a living time capsule, remaining intact with their original lineup for over 50 years. To date, they have sold over 50 million records worldwide, and the carnival is still not over for these beloved icons of Australian music.
Till I die. In my life, I love you more. In my life, I love you more.
And I think it would only be fitting to close with a word from Judith, don't you think?
And of course, where would I be tonight without all of you? I know I'll never find another you, so thank you. And believe me, if they gave me a fortune, my pleasure would be very, very small compared with the joy of being here with all of you tonight. Thanks so very much for coming. Hope I'll see you again soon. But if I should lose your love, dear, I don't know what I'd do, for I know I'll never find another you. Another you. Ooh, another you.
Well, I think they've given us such a good show. Don't you think we should ask them for an encore? Sure. They're asking for an encore, guys. Okay. They're granting us an encore. And we hope you enjoy it.
Every artist who lives by music longs to find one special composition which conveys his or her own personality. And we each look for an opportunity to express ourselves. Miss Durham has been fortunate enough to find such a composition. It is now our pleasure and hers to present this artistically gratifying recital.
Keith is so broad.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're very honored. We're very honored.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for coming.
And good night.